Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on, I think we're at episode 179 of Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline. I'm Billy Bob on the West Coast. I have my regular co-host, Ian Cummer, streaming live from a suburb in Moscow. I believe, I always get the times wrong. It's like 6 or 7 p.m. Let's go with 7. Is it 7 p.m., Ian?
You're close. It's 8 p.m.
8 p.m. Moscow time. It's 9 a.m., like I said, West Coast time. We have a lot of current events we were hoping to discuss. Current events and predictions, and analyzing these current events and trying to figure out what they foretell or portend for 2026. So, I want to go back to about a week ago, maybe it was about a week ago, and there was a very large drone attack on a Putin residence somewhere in Russia, and it kind of caused a stir, in the Russian government because it was kind of an unprecedented, a drone attack on Putin's residence itself, which was an escalation and like a red line that hasn't been crossed before. And it caused a lot of consternation. So I remember Trump was on a phone call with Putin, and Putin mentioned this to him. And then when Trump got off the phone call, he told reporters that, he couldn't believe that Ukraine would do something like this, and it was a stupid thing for Ukraine to do, et cetera, et cetera. Shortly after that, Trump changed his mind and said it didn't happen. And, and he agreed, and he sides with Ukraine, who denies, that they had launched an attack on Putin's residence. Subsequent to that, the Russian government did get some evidence from some of the drones themselves. So they got some targeting data from some of the drones themselves. And ostensibly, this targeting data from the drones proved that, in fact, Russia was telling the truth, and there was an effort to, attack Putin's residence. So Russia at that point said, we will, we're going to decide on a response, but there will be a response for this provocation. And ostensibly, last night, we saw what that response was. We saw the use of this highly advanced weapons system called Oreshnik, which is strangely translates to hazelnut, I think, in English. Yes. And so the Oreshnik was used on a drone manufacturing plant and also on an energy infrastructure used to, power the military industrial complex, including that drone manufacturing plant. Now, the Oreshnik, it's a very powerful weapon system, and it did considerable damage to the power grid, that Ukraine relies on to wage war. And obviously, it, the people of Ukraine are relying on this power grid, but this power grid is becoming increasingly under attack. And as they face this cold winter, they are really struggling to just provide electricity and heat to people. So my understanding, Ian, and I do want to hand it to you after I say this, is that the mayor of Kiev has invited or has suggested that everybody who can leave the city ought to leave the city because they are not going to be able to give people enough, electricity for this winter. So is any of that untrue, or do you have anything to add to that, Ian?
It's a good synopsis, what you just said. So, yeah, so there was I forget the exact date, but there was a well-publicized Ukrainian multi-pronged drone attack on a presidential residence, or state residence is what they call it, in Novgorod region, I think it was. And there was no official confirmation from the Russian government on the location of the president. Of course, there were rumors that Ukraine was trying to actually hit him at the place he was talking to Trump, since he's not, because that was it was a publicized phone conversation. They knew he wasn't going to be traveling. He was going to be he was going to be in one place, for several hours. So that's a widely disseminated theory on what they were trying to do. But of course, Russia didn't confirm or deny if Putin himself was at that particular place, but we can guess. And also, there was that New York Times article saying that the Ukrainian strikes on Russian energy infrastructure was coordinated with the CIA, and the CIA was continuing to give Ukraine unfettered access to their intelligence infrastructure and pinpoint these strikes. And this was even after Trump cut most of the military funding and support to Ukraine. So that's just what these anonymous sources to the New York Times were saying. So we don't know if that's just them trying to stir the pot, or if it's trying to take credit for brilliant Ukrainian work, right? Oh, that they couldn't have done it without us. So there's several interpretations, but it's interesting that coincided so closely with a strike that would have required very good intelligence to have succeeded.
Yeah, there seems to be a social media, alternative media consensus that none of that is going to be possible without U.S. intelligence and targeting data. That's what I mean. All the analysts that I watch, on the alternative media.
Ukrainian human intelligence is probably much better than what the USA has, because they're the adjacent country to Russia with a shared language. Don't tell them that, oh, God forbid. But there's their human intelligence of having informants and spies and sympathizers on the ground in Russia is probably much better than what the USA has. But when it comes to satellite intelligence, signal intelligence, geospatial intelligence, all of that stuff, the USA has a vastly larger infrastructure and, of course, a very large workforce too. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of analysts in several different agencies who, their entire job is to collect this data and synthesize it into intelligence products that actually provides the user actionable information. Now, that said, that was a significant provocation that Russia, because immediately, even just within a few hours, actually not even an hour, like 30 minutes after Lavrov first made the statement that there was that attack, Zelensky tweeted that it wasn't true. So basically almost immediately, but then, in the following 24 hours, the Russian Ministry of Defense doubled down on it, saying it was true, and they released a video of what was purportedly one of the Ukrainian drones used in the attack. They, like you mentioned, they released flight data recovered from the drones, and and this evidence was turned over to the USA. So the USA could say, "Oh, well, this is a fake." To my knowledge, aside from the anonymous sources to the news, which is what it is, there's been to my knowledge, no official statement from anybody yet that this is a fake, that the USA, that Trump or anyone in the USA, on an official basis, is accusing Russia of faking it. Now, all that said, and like Defiance 856, whatever commenters here said, mentioned the chip. Yeah, so it's kind of evidence that would very quickly, I think, confirm or deny if it was true. The USA could say, well, this is this is legitimate, or they could say, well, this is a fake, right? But as far as I know, they haven't come out and said outright that it's a fake. Now, all that said, it's not the only provocation. There was a very serious mass casualty event. There's also a Ukrainian drone strike on a cafe and hotel right around, I think it was right on New Year's Eve. And the most recent, I haven't checked the numbers for I think almost a week now, but the last figure I had seen was 26 killed and around 50 people injured, including several children. And they released, I didn't see a full list of victims, but they released a partial list of victims. So it was, it was a lot of people of varying ages. There was a lot of women. I think 50 to 60% of the victims were actually women. So, if someone on the side is trying to spin it as like, oh, it was a military target, it was some sort of military, celebration or gathering. It's based on the names Russia released, that's unlikely because of the presence of women and the children. So that was another serious provocation. And of course, there's these daily, ISIS style. I mean, it is at this point ISIS style. These ISIS style drone attacks on automobiles, on apartments. So there is, every, because I monitor Twitter and Telegram fairly closely. So there are fatalities, civilian fatalities in Donbass and Belgorod region in particular, sometimes Kherson, all of those neighboring regions. Unfortunately, there's casualties almost every day from those. So there's a lot of reasons to escalate, for Russia to escalate with Ukraine, and they're not. And from the Ukrainian sources, and of course the pro-Ukrainian Western media sources, I see a lot of this kind of selective memory to say, oh, Putin's escalating, Russia's escalating, and they kind of memory hole these great Ukrainian victories they were just crowing about, days earlier. So it's like, this Ukraine launched this successful attack, and then they turn around and say, oh, Russia's bullying poor helpless Ukraine for no reason. Like they didn't even do anything. So it's a very selective goldfish memory that we're dealing with from those people.
I wanted to point out the nature of the special military operation that Russia is conducting is qualitatively different than waging war and waging military war. And Russia's made this point before. And, Putin's spoken directly to the fact that the special military operation is, has certain objectives, but it's not all out war. And, if the U.S. was in the position that Russia was in, the U.S. would have used all of its Oreshniks and just leveled, Kiev and Lvov and, all these places. But Russia's not doing that, and they really are, being surgical and selective in their targeting, and they really do not, target civilians. And there's no, they have no desire to target civilians, but the opposite is not true. And so, you talked about this New Year's Day attack, deliberately, attacking a New Year's Eve gathering of civilians to, just to terrorize the Russian people. And murder as many innocent civilians as they can. Like Russia isn't doing that. So these are just qualitatively different approaches, and it just shows the nature of both sides. Now, of course, Ukraine is about they want to misrepresent that. They want to lie about that fact, and they'll show you apartment buildings in Kiev that have been hit, right? And my guess is most of those apartment buildings are probably getting hit with errant anti-missile missiles that come back and hit, the residential areas. They're shot up to attack, Russian missiles that are aimed at military targets, and then they miss the missile and they come down and they hit civilian and residential areas. And then those photos are, of course, shown, oh, look at the kindergarten that Russia just attacked. That's just the nature of war. That's the nature of the information war. But I think it's important to to highlight that point and to make clear that Russia, had they been interested in waging an all-out war like the U.S. would have done instead of a special military operation, they would just be engaged completely differently.
Well, so yeah, I mean, that's all true. I mean, just the first several months of the invasion of Iraq killed 30,000 Iraqi civilians, which is more than 4 years of civilian casualties on both sides. And I think that's important caveat, both sides of this, because it's not just Russian forces inflicting civilian casualties on Ukrainians. Ukrainian forces are also inflicting civilian casualties, and the OSCE numbers, the actual figures that were released before 2022, showed that period from 2000. There was that 8-year period from 2014 to 2022. Beginning of 2022 showed that roughly 80% of the civilian casualties from artillery, in violation of the ceasefire or the Minsk agreement, were on the rebel side of the contact line. So 80%, and I suspect after the special military operation is over, and there's well substantiated figures for the civilian casualties from the whole conflict, I suspect it's going to be something very similar. 80% of the civilian casualties caused by the Ukrainian side and 20% by the Russian side. I think it's probably going to be something very, very close to that. Now, as far as, surgical precision, I mean, there's something to be said for it. No, I think the question on everybody's mind is, when is it going to end? How is Russia going to end this? And unfortunately, so far, there's not really been a great solution besides destroying Ukrainian forces and manpower and equipment as they show up to the front, do deep strikes on Ukrainian equipment and personnel and infrastructure. But the way a conventional war is normally won, of actually taking territory, destroying the military, physically destroying, occupying the population so they can't be recruited into the military, and destroying the military industrial complex, that has not happened. And Ukraine's, even if they did steamroll Ukrainian territory, taking Kyiv, taking Kharkov, I mean, those two cities in particular would, I think, eliminate most of Ukraine's organic military industrial complex. The problem is that so much, I think at this point, 60-70% at least of their war economy is coming from outside the country. So short of an actual war with NATO, you can't just smash their military industrial complexes. Their military industrial complex, for the most part, isn't even there. It's on the other side of the border. So that's really created, not a clear. I'm not sure what is discussed behind closed doors and not released to the public. But it's not clear to me how much of a plan there has been. Besides, here's our long-term goals, here's what we want, and here's what we're doing on kind of a day-to-day basis. I'm not sure beyond that. Anybody actually on either side has a particular plan on how this is going to end. Now, I was, and actually, as Condor the Birds just commented here, which we displayed on the screen, Ukraine's capacities are proof of the greatness of the Soviet Union, which is I think is true, because they have because their energy, because Ukraine was an industrial powerhouse in the Soviet Union. They built a lot of infrastructure, and their energy grid and their industrial capability is designed to withstand nuclear strikes. like, so if you did, a limited nuclear war against Soviet Ukraine to include Crimea, in theory, it wouldn't, be 100%. It wouldn't be 100% depleted, materially. It would still be substations online. There'd still be energy production. There's some of the factories would survive. So that's is extraordinary. So it's extraordinarily difficult to just do the shock and awe thing and knock them out of the war with just airstrikes. It's almost impossible. But there are. And I actually was, for the longest time, considered a pessimist on this. Like, I was saying, oh, this will be over. This isn't going to be. I was saying this for 2 years. It's not going to be over until the summer of 2025. And a lot of people are saying, no, there's no way it's going to drag on that long. And I was saying that because I just was, I just think, Biden wouldn't be able to. It would just be there'd be just no return on investment. It would just be a huge expenditure while inflicting very minimal losses on Russia. It wouldn't make any sense. It'd be so unpopular at that point. The USA would be forced to back out and basically reach an agreement with Russia. And that agreement would be just accepting the Russian terms that they laid out in the winter of 2021, before the first shots had even been fired. Now here we are. We have Trump as president, not Biden. We didn't even get Kamala Harris. We got Trump, which I did not expect at all. But we had something similar happen where he it seemed like he was fishing for a way out. Of course, we can all theorize on why that didn't happen, but I'd say the main one is that he wanted it. He wanted to have his cake and eat it too. He wanted to portray the USA as this neutral peacemaker, while also making it a victory for the USA. It's like, well, it can't be both. It can't be both. Here's this deal I negotiated as a neutral party, and here's this victory they got for me as a participant. Well, it can't. One of those things can be true, but not both. And so it's dragged on. But the factors. But I think it should have really ended last summer, because we've seen Kursk was Ukraine's last major offensive. 2025 was the first full year we didn't see a new big counteroffensive. Now, it's true that the Kursk TikTok offense bled into the beginning of 2025. That is true, but there was no new offensive, and that's the first full year that's gone by without a new big offensive. There's just nothing. I mean, there were some brigade level counteroffensives that had varying degrees of success. Pokrovsk, we have this ongoing fight around Kupiansk. But they have not taken any, and so there's been no major counteroffensive, and they have not taken back a single major urban area that was captured by Russia. It's been a slow progression, but it's been completely one-sided one. Not a single time since fall of 2022, Ukraine has not recaptured a single major urban area.
Yeah.
Not once. It's been just a string of defeats and being pushed back. And so we have a lot of culminating factors that are coming into play, which makes it very hard for me to believe it's going to go past 2026. Because like you mentioned, this winter is going to be very hard on people. More people are going to leave legally and illegally. And I'm sure Ukraine must realize this, but every person who leaves, regardless of his age or sex, is going to be difficult to get to that person to come back. Because even if the war was over tomorrow, well, it's still the poorest country in Europe, not even talking about the war, even just leaving out the war damage. It's just like, why come back? If you got out of Ukraine, why would you want to come back rather than stay in the country that you had successfully moved to? So there's been some pretty horrific guesstimates on how much population total Ukraine has lost. I mean, it's very likely that in the territory that Ukraine, that is under Ukrainian control, there might be less than 20 million people at this point. At the beginning of the war, the most optimistic estimates at the beginning of the war was that the population of Ukraine on both sides of the contact line, to include the rebel regions, was maybe 40 million. I mean, and a lot of people are saying that's too optimistic. Just no way to be sure because they haven't done a census in 20 years. But the most optimistic estimates for both sides was 40 million. And now it's the parts of Ukraine shrunk, and their population is probably under 20 million. It's a huge loss. Now, another factor is the desertion. So typically, of course, like even Patton said this in his autobiography about World War II. Enemy body counts, the body count metrics that a lot of generals love because it makes them look good and makes good headlines. It's not terribly useful because if you're inflicting enemy casualties, I mean, maybe you're winning, but the main thing is that the enemy is fighting, because if they weren't fighting, they wouldn't be taking losses. So it's like the fact that the enemy is fighting does not automatically mean you're winning, because if they are fighting, they are giving coherent resistance against you. But he said the much more useful metric was the number of surrenders, the number of prisoners that you get on the front line. Now, this war, I think, is unusual because both sides have taken however many thousands of prisoners, but as a percentage of overall losses, it's been very few, like a tiny percentage. But the bigger one is that when someone decides the fight's unwinnable, most of the time they just leave. They just run away. They abandon their place of duty without orders. And those can be just people just, not necessarily deserting, but people just leaving a position without orders. And then there's desertions, which are long-term dereliction of duty, of just leaving the army and just say, I quit. I'm not going to fight anymore. I'm just going to blend back into the population. And those numbers are a lot more difficult to track, except what the respective sides admit. So both sides have had desertions, but Ukraine's has increased. So in 2025, they had more cases, prosecutions, open cases for desertion than all previous years combined, the last 3 years combined. And that's extremely, I think that shows a trend, right? It's that morale's breaking down. That people are questioning these, not one step back orders they've been given. It's like, well, what are we doing? And we also have to consider that as far as troop rotations go, Ukraine's are a lot harder than on Russia's, because Russian troops can rotate out fairly regularly from the front, so you're not just stuck in frontline combat for weeks on end without a break. But the same cannot be said for Ukraine. And so that's just taking a toll on morale, and also just the casualties. It makes recruitment, so they're continuing to conscript more people, and it looks like a lot of them are just deserting. Right before they've even they right at the beginning on day one, and of course, just conscripting people is getting. I think it's more as you scrape the bottom of the barrel more. It gets more difficult because the people who have hid this long are apparently very good at hiding, or just have inside connections, or whatever the case may be. They're just very good at hiding. It's getting really, people who will actually willingly accept, because it's very hard to force someone to risk his life, because realistically, what are you going to threaten him with? I'm going to put you in jail. I'm going to shoot you if you don't go get shot. It's kind of a contradiction. It's very difficult to force the unwilling to fight if they really don't want to. And I think they're running into that problem more often as they have to replace losses. And it's just, we would be very surprised if we don't see some sort of conclusion this year. And I think the problem is that, yes, it's been kind of very little territorial change. You're like, oh, look, it's a glacial rate of advance. But I do think if there is an actual military collapse, that morale and losses reach a point where Ukraine just can't hold the ground at all, and there's just a general collapse, then it won't. I think at that point it won't matter if the front line is in Donetsk region or if it's outside Kyiv. When there's a general collapse, it doesn't matter, and you win. It doesn't matter what the front line is; you just win, regardless of where you happen to be on the playing field. We saw that in World War One. Germany did not actually lose territory. They did not lose the war on German soil at the end of World War One. They were still in France when they realized it was militarily impossible. I think something very similar could happen, especially if they don't find a negotiated solution expeditiously. And if you know what I mean, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, you're just painting a picture of why it's unlikely that it could last another year, and why we have to be getting very close to some kind of a resolution, which of course begs the question, what kind of resolution, is likely? What kind of resolution are we going to see? And then when you think about that question, it just seems so impossible that any kind of resolution, because they're just the things that Europe and Russia are saying. Europe and Ukraine and Russia on the other hand are saying, they're just so far apart. But events on the ground could force a shift in that dynamic, and it could force concessions from Ukraine and from Europe, the likes of which we have not seen yet. So up until now, they're just being what I would describe as delusional in the kinds of things they're saying, considering the situation that you just described. And how long can they embrace those delusions? How long can those delusions govern their policies? I mean, at some point, there's those things are going to just disconnect. But in the meantime, we see that the West is trying to put pressure on Russia. You spoke about the terror attack, like the constant terror attacks, car bombs, the drone attack on the cafe. But there's also asymmetric warfare going on. There's this real ratcheting up and escalation against the Russian flagged energy. They call it the Ghost Fleet, right? The Ghost Fleet is what they describe as the system of ships that move Russian energy around the planet, outside of the Western system. And so, anything that's outside of the Western system is attacked. It's deemed suspicious. It's illegitimate. So they use a propaganda term like Ghost Fleet to describe it. But more and more, tankers are being attacked. Do you want to talk about the most recent high-profile one that happened, and kind of contextualize that, because that was a little bit different than the attacks that we've seen on the Russian flagships? I think off the Turkish coast and also in the Mediterranean, we've seen a few. But there was one recently, I think, in the Atlantic, and that's an interesting case, and it has to do with Venezuela. Do you want to speak to that, or you want me to summarize?
Yes, and that was the. I'm sorry I didn't give you a chance to look at before the show, but that was the topic of a piece I wrote yesterday. And I included a link to this story on our blog, Reading Junkie. I'm going to share it to the screen here, so you can find a link to this story in the description of the video. So I'm going to just bring it up on the screen for you all to take a look at. So what I said yesterday, and this is in regards to the Manera, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So basically, this was it was an empty oil tanker that was headed to Venezuela to fuel, and then it was being trailed by American ships. They actually, in December, it's a little bit unclear who originally. I've heard several different stories. So it's kind of it was apparently an Iran linked ship, and its owner and its crew were kind of this mix of Ukrainians. Like apparently there's an owner or a co-owner of this ship was actually in Odessa, interestingly enough. But there's a mix of crew of Ukrainians and Russians on this ship. But last month in December, they requested to be added to the Russian registry and sail under a Russian flag, which Russia had granted. And reportedly
what was the impetus that made them make that request? Like that request didn't happen
because they were being chased by the Americans, and they were hoping that having the flag of a major power would dissuade American forces from storming the ship, which ended up happening anyway. And that's what led me to, if you guys can see this on my screen here, write this article. What World War III really means is the era of freedom of navigation is over. And what I mean by that is the USA engaging in escalating its piracy policies. Its actions do have consequences, and the problem is that it's creating a precedent to end freedom of navigation. Because there have been wars after World War II, but privateers and pirates of different countries and different governments hiring pirates to attack each other's ships, which has happened in past centuries, was discouraged, right? There's this idea that, unless you are directly engaged in war with someone and this ship is participating in it by some way, like, for example, delivering or taking material from a port that's considered in the war zone. So, like, for example, ships going to Crimea or ships going to Odessa could be considered participating in that conflict. So a Russian drone could hit one, which has happened several times recently also. And, Ukraine could say, oh, well, this ship is participating in the Russian war of aggression against us. We hit that ship. So there's legal justifications for doing that. But what's happening now is just like, well, we don't like these people for whatever reason. So we're just going to take their ships as they're sailing around because we can. And my argument is that's radically going to change the world economy. Because it's just, tankers aren't completely safe. Sometimes they crash. Sometimes they just don't show up where they're supposed to or get delayed by months. But if you just had this where it's just impossible to cheaply insure them, because there's just a fairly high chance that ship's going to be molested or attacked or hit or boarded on its trip, that's going to radically make overseas shipping more expensive, which is really going to impact our post-industrial lifestyle of, why do we need to make our own T-shirts, our own knickknacks? You can grow oranges in Latin America, ship them to a processing plant in Thailand, and then ship it back to California or Florida. You think of how many different, if you just look at a pack of oranges or whatever, pickles, and think of how many different countries that thing is sailed around before it ends up on the grocery shelf. I mean, if and the thing is, so I don't, and I wrote in articles, I don't think Russia and China are going to do a direct tit for tat for that behavior, because that would tarnish their own international standing, not just with the USA, but they don't want to damage their international standing with other people who aren't playing that game. However, smaller countries, smaller states and non-state entities who have a lot less to lose, maybe they're already sanctioned, maybe they're just already ostracized so they don't lose anything. At this point, anyone who can afford a drone can go sink and damage ships from people you don't like. So, and Yemen, and there's the thing. So Yemen did this. They declared this humanitarian blockade of Israel until they end their genocidal war against Gaza. And the USA was like, hey, that's not allowed. That's not allowed. So we're going to bomb the hell out of you. Now, people have debated how effective that was. And a lot of people say, well, they kind of kept doing it. But from a precedent standpoint, no one's really going to say, well, because Yemen did this, I'm going to do it too. Yemen isn't like a world leader. People don't copy Yemen. But I think they will copy the USA. If the USA threw away its own rules, the USA always kind of did stuff like that to Venezuela, to Iran. They always, for decades and decades, they've done stuff like that. But when they've escalated it to, if it doesn't matter who you're flagged under. If you're a Chinese ship, a Russian ship, you're just anybody that we happen to not like and we don't want you to move their stuff around, we're just going to take the ship. I do think this post-World War II, if you will, this Pax Americana, as they like to call it, this American era is going to be ended by the USA itself. It's just like, who is going to follow? Who is even going to care about that rule if the USA is so flagrantly ignoring it? And that is going to create a precedent. Ukraine was because the USA. If you think about Russia intervening in Ukraine, their word for word argument, or at least one of them, was that NATO did the same thing in Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
And that wasn't the only time. They just say, well, we don't like this government because we think we just say, you don't even need to present evidence. Just they're killing their own people, or they're killing this minority group, and that is grounds to invade them and establish a different government. Well, then anybody can do that. And I think we're going to see something similar with the piracy angle.
Yeah. So yeah, you're describing the shift, the huge paradigmatic shifts that are taking place, on the planet. And we have to be careful when we discuss these things, because it's nuanced. And like you said, it's not like that the previous history has been, the United States has been abiding by the rule of law, right? So the United States has always been violating its own rules, and it's always, considered itself exceptional and not beholden to the rules that it demands everyone else to, follow. So in that sense, like, it's the same as it's always been, but there is a qualitative difference, and there is a shift. It's a matter of degree. And we can see that, the United States has really decided that the old system has no usefulness for what the United States feels it has to do around the planet. And so you really see this unprecedented break with the heretofore existing world order. And this break, it's going to be significant. And so I agree with what you're saying. It's like, we haven't seen retaliation yet, but I think the U.S. is trying to elicit retaliation, and then they're going to seize upon that retaliation, to further push this new era, this new order that they are, they're interested in making, and becoming unconstrained with, the things like international rule, international law, and all these conventions that the United States has at least given lip service to in the past. They want to make a total break with those things, and they want to engage in a might makes right kind of paradigm, unprecedentedly. Like, again, it's always been that way, but just to not this degree, and the degree to which this is happening, and the efficiency with which the paradigm is shifting is really it's really changing fast. So yeah, I mean, we can see how these smaller countries that can't do anything. Venezuela, Iran, they're really tightening their blockade, and also Russia. They're going after these vulnerable, Russian flagged ships. Now, Medvedev spoke to, and you might have mentioned this in your article, and I apologize for not getting to read it. But Medvedev spoke to what happened with this most recent tanker, and yeah, it was fleeing from the United States, and then it thought if it re-registered with Russia and became a Russian flagged ship, that the United States would not attack it. And Medvedev made clear that that's basically what happened. And in hindsight, he was saying that it's the conclusion should have been they should have assumed what was going to happen, because it did not deter the United States, and the United States went ahead and took it anyway. Medvedev was like, it's not the end of the world. We expect that to happen. We thought, there was a slight chance that maybe doing this would have saved the vessel, and so they allowed the vessel to re-register. But it wasn't that big of a thing. I don't know. I heard there's like thousands, right? There's maybe 6,000 tankers that are moving Russian energy around the planet, and so we've heard like about, I don't know, less than 5, I think, that have been actually attacked. So it's important to keep in mind the significance of this. Obviously, it's an escalation, and it's a provocation, and it's aggression, but in the large scope of things, it really is still a pretty minute and not that important of a thing. Over time, of course, it could ramp up, and it could significantly interfere with the Russian economy. But as it's happened now, it's just more of a slap in the face. It's more of a provocation than any kind of serious strategic threat to the Russian economy and the state of Russia and their special military operation in Ukraine. So where do we want to go from here, Ian?
Well, it's going to be, it's interesting. There's a lot of things in motion, and they're all connected, right? Because Venezuela is connected to Russia and Ukraine, because Trump being able to personally control that oil, the world's largest oil reserve, would be a huge bartering chip for him on that table. And it also plays into what's happening with Iran, where there's protests all over the news right now. The government's about to collapse again. It's one of those things where it's hard to say, right? And unfortunately, our news media gave up news a long time ago and took up the art of persuasion. They really try, instead of just reporting, here's what's happening, they try to persuade people to wish something into it. I mean, I think that is, in fact, literally, if you convince enough people something is happening, it does actually happen. And that's their game. It's what they've successfully did in Syria. It's what they tried to do in Russia. It's what they tried to do I guess they tried to do in Venezuela. They took Maduro and they said, "Oh, Trump runs Venezuela now," and no, there was no regime change in Venezuela. They just took the one guy. Yeah. The government's still in power. Nothing's changed. Yeah. But they're kind of trying to do that with Iran. So maybe it is known that Iran is in very serious economic trouble right now. Right. So that doesn't mean the government's in danger of collapsing, but there's clearly a lot of people who are unhappy. I'm sure there's some foreign influence making that dissatisfaction worse. So it's kind of, it's ugly. And unfortunately, um, Iran's largest trade partner is not Russia, of course, it's China. And China has not said, "Oh, we're going to help out Iran." They haven't said that, unfortunately. So Iran
Okay.
is on
So
one.
yeah, let's talk about what's going on in Iran. I mean, it seems that right now, there's this all-out Western effort to, agitate the citizenry as best they can, and cause the biggest amount of, chaos in the hopes of overthrowing the regime. Like, that is definitely what seems to be afoot. Now, I've heard several things. Yesterday, I heard Iran turned off its entire internet to protect itself. They are engaged in a widespread crackdown trying to roll up these, Western agents and, provocateurs. For instance, like, anytime you hear that Iranian security person was grabbed and burned and murdered, that the CIA is there on the ground, directing that. These are the kinds of provocations the CIA does, specifically to elicit, a response from the government, and then in order to then, respond to that escalation, and just, and going on this spiral of escalation. Now, in addition to all the domestic networks of Western who are flying the flag of the monarchy, right? They're like burning the Iranian flag, and they're putting the flag of the previous monarchy in its place. And it's a minority. It's a minority within Iran who want to overthrow the government, but they have been sponsored and they've been supported by the West and nurtured for decades. But in addition to the domestic, minority that has been encouraged to, cause all these this uproar, you also have an invasion. Now, this is what I've read on Telegram. So, some Kurdish troops have entered, Iran under the cover of all these, protests. And then I heard what I heard, and who knows if it's true, but I heard that Turkey was monitoring this. Turkey warned the IRGC, and the IRGC has eliminated those Kurdish militia forces that have, invaded Iran. So, of course, this is all, I'm reading this morning. And so, and it's Telegram. So the bottom line is there is definitely a program, an effort, a regime change effort, a serious regime change effort, pulling all the stops out, underway right now, and they are battling to overthrow the Iranian regime. I don't think it's going to succeed. I think that, Iran is taking the necessary measures to quell these protests, and I think it's reprehensible that, this minority group thinks that they're going to force, their will on the Iranian nation, and it's not going to happen. It's not going to succeed. The Iranian government will continue in place. But I do probably see that this will be used as an excuse to also bomb it. And so I could definitely see the United States trying to do some bombing. I can see Israel doing some bombing. They're going to let this play out. They're going to let this play out. And if it looks like, the regime is going to, the government, shouldn't call it a regime. I'm just, buying into their propaganda. But the Iranian government, when it looks like they're not going to be dislodged, I expect phase two. Phase two will be probably some military strikes, and who knows at that point, because Iran also has deterrence. Iran has a capability of response, their own military response, and so I like this. So Todd. Todd is saying that, the Iranian government has pretty much pacified the protesters. And who knows, I do believe the internet has been turned off. And so it's hard to know with any certainty what's going on in the different regions. And there's some regions that are, stronger in the opposition support, and then some that are obviously pro government. But it is definitely a hot spot. It's definitely a big desire of Western imperialism to regime change Iran, just like it is to regime change Venezuela. And so all these things are happening very quickly at the beginning of 2026. And it just shows the, the desperation of the West to do something, to really, get control over the planet, because they feel that it's slipping out of their control, and that they really have to start making these huge geopolitical moves, which just again it just one of the most important aspects of it is the ideological aspect. And Western imperialism always praises itself for being a liberal democracy. But when it comes down to it, liberal democracy is nothing but advertisement and window dressing for straight up oligarchy and imperialism. And so when they get desperate, this becomes obvious, and liberals ought to see this and reject their liberalism and understand the real dynamics that govern, geopolitics, domestic politics, and the way things actually work in the world, which is more of a class dynamic. It's more the wealthy elites are pursuing their interests, and their interests are in opposition to the interests of humanity, to the interests of the working class majority. But you know where I'm headed there, Ian, and I see your eyes glazing over. So I will.
No. I was just going to add. No, I mean, I was just going to add what Condor's comments here that Iran. Maybe I'm not an expert on Iran, but that being too involved in people's daily lives and at the same time being too self-impressed. It's I can see that, because if you're up it, you have the morality police, because they do have a morality police. You're policing people's how they dress and whatnot, their personal morality. It can be a case of not picking your battles, because maybe they should be harder on those violent protests, but cut people some slack on some of the ideological stuff. So I think there's something to be, and not to mention the Ayatollah, as Defiance is saying. I'm not going to fact check this. I don't know when he was born, but yeah, he's old. Maybe they need someone new. There can be a problem when you have somebody who's in power. He doesn't necessarily want to let go of that power. That can be a problem. It's like it is sooner or later time for a younger person to take over the helm of the ship.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's I'm in a supportive of whatever methods that the government in Iran can take to defend themselves against the regime change efforts from Israel and Western imperialism. If they would be strengthened by some reforms within the government, like I would support those reforms. But I don't think that the government is the problem. I think the problem is Western imperialism, and I think there are no reforms that the government could do that would
make them happy. Yes,
that would make the Western imperialists happy. I mean, the Western imperialists want to control Iran. They want to control Iran's resources, and they, that's what they want. And then they want to, use that control to weaponize it against Russia and against China. Like, this is the goal. This is the big picture politics is, Russia and China are the enemies of Western imperialism. And so they're engaging in these efforts to strengthen their hand, to shape the battlefield so that in the future they will be in the best possible position to regime change, balkanize Russia and China. I mean, that's what is going on, and it's been going on for a while now. You can read it in all the think tanks. You can see it as clear as day. When you see the actions that they're doing, it's all to that end. And so we should not be confused about that. We should be clear-eyed about that. And we should understand that, the only thing that is keeping it from happening is, the limitations of the West, and the fact that, they have to be concerned about optics to a point, to a degree. It's like all this, I'm going to take Greenland, like that's kind of backfiring, right? And you see that people are saying, that's just something that, I can't at least give lip service to. Now, behind the scenes, I reference this a lot, but Netanyahu said, those people who denounce me, on camera about my genocide in Gaza, behind the scenes, they thank me. And of course, I have no doubt that that's true, that, all these Western imperialists, are supportive of what we're doing in Venezuela, of taking Venezuela's oil, of taking Greenland, of, supporting the genocide in Gaza. But they can't say that out loud because they know it would disgust their own political careers and discuss their own, the people who they rely on to, for support in their own countries, their own working class. So there's a limit to the power of propaganda. And optics are a constraining force. They don't want to do they can't do things that are over the top. They're constrained by certain optics. And then there's also, obviously military limitations, and as much as they would like to just, take out the Chinese government and put it, they can't. And so they are working on, setting up the battlefield, shaping the battlefield so that at some future point they can do that. Anyway, Ian, I see Spaz is trying to get on.
He beat down the door. You saw him. He beat down the door on me. I've been trying to keep him quiet since the show started, but yes, here he is for everybody. This is Spaz. He's an American Beagle, and he came to Russia with me, so he's here.
He's happy to not have to share your attention with his cat mate.
Yes.
With the big Russian cat.
Yes, with the cat here. Yes.
So Todd is bringing up the point here that as part of this effort by Western imperialism to dominate the planet, they engage in these sanctions. And ever since World War II, where the United States accounted for half the global economy and only 5% of the world's population, they have managed to create a global economic system that they really have a lot of power in. And they have the power. They have the economic power to really impoverish and to destroy the development, to curtail the development of these small little countries that are, that are intransigent and that, demand sovereignty. So countries like Cuba, North Korea, Venezuela, Nicaragua, like these are small little countries compared to the United States. And the fact that they demand, sovereignty and they refuse to be, vassals of the United States puts them in the target, in the crosshairs of Western imperialism. And the sanctions, the economic warfare that the U.S. wages against these countries does cause these countries to have to sacrifice. And so Cuba has been sacrificing for decades. North Korea has been sacrificing. Venezuela has been sacrificing. And then, the ideological propaganda comes in and says, look, socialism always fails. Look at how these people are having to sacrifice for socialism. And, and they blame the ideology of socialism. So these are the kinds of, arguments that, that need to be addressed. These are for addressed so that people who are genuinely seeking to understand what's going on, aren't swayed by these nonsense, ideological narratives, that only serve the purpose of causing people to become detached from reality and to lack an understanding of what is really going on and taking place. But boy, we're really soapboxing. I'm really soapboxing. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I soapboxed. I did my share of soapboxing too, so it's all good. But yeah, what else do we want to hit tonight?
I want to talk about the importance of the ideological warfare, of the ideological debate, of how we understand reality and how it and why it matters. And liberalism is the ideology of the and when I talk about liberalism, it's always, big L, classical liberalism. It's the ideology of the ownership class, and it's the ownership class that is the group who Western governments serve. It is, it is represented by Western governments, and the working class, we're not, our interests really don't matter to the policies that our government pursues, because ultimately these governments do not represent the working class. And so that's what socialism says. Socialism says we need to put in a government that, is representative of the interests of the working class. And if we did that, we would see really different policies pursued by our governments. Instead of, driving the planet to confrontation and war, we would be engaged in peace, through mutual prosperity with, with our so-called rivals. And these aren't rivals, right? These are fellow humans that want to exist and prosper and, develop ways that, benefit humanity, develop, systems and economies that work for the vast majority of humans, not just a tiny minority of pedophile bankers. So that's really the, the two sides, and everybody has a choice about, which side to support. But it's due to this ideological warfare, the constant cradle to grave indoctrination that confuses people and causes them to, have opinions that are self-defeating and detached from the objective reality. Anyway, yeah, I really feel that I'm soapboxing a little bit here.
No, you're fine. You're fine. That's what this show is for.
So it's going to be interesting. Part of me feels that, 2026 could very well be the year that, the Ukraine war ends and that there's some kind of a settlement. But on the other hand, like the idea that Europe is ready to surrender and because that was what it would be. If they ever agreed to anything that Russia would agree to, it would be tantamount to surrender. And at this point, I just think that as opposed to surrender and peace, I see more provocations and more war on the on the horizon. So, that's the unfortunate reality. I mean, that's the direction we are being pushed. We are being forced in this direction towards more escalation, and it remains to be seen how that looks. But I know we will be here observing it, talking about it, sharing our informed opinions, which is way, way, way better than anything the establishment press can do, because the establishment press, is totally bought and paid for. But I also have problems with the alternative media, right? Like the alternative media, there's a lot of good criticisms of individual policies, but by and large, almost all of these analysts that I enjoy and I watch, John Mearsheimer, Scott Ritter, everybody on The Judge that comes on, all these guys, it's like they are coming from an incorrect ideological position, they're not coming from a place of understanding class struggle, socialism, and how class is so important in understanding these things. And for that reason, I'm always pulling my hair out and yelling at the screen. It's like, oh, you're so. So that's one thing that we do here is try and give a correct ideological perspective in addition to the correct criticisms. And I think that ideological perspective is missing in a lot of the alternative media. And I think that's one thing that this show brings that a lot of those other shows don't. Anyway, let's see. Yes, no. Okay. So Todd is just, he's really encouraging me to continue my my diatribing. But yeah, no, it's true. It's like it doesn't even play a part in any of their analysis, and that is such a tremendous limitation in their analysis. And so yeah, I oh, he's really he's really bad. Colonel McGregor, don't get me started on Colonel McGregor. A real anti-communist.
Not a fan of McGregor, huh?
No, I mean, yeah, no, he's always just saying these, denigrating terms like Stalinist and communist, and he's just bought into
Yes.
all the Cold War historiography where communism was opposed to freedom, and yeah, he's pretty
Such
confused
a
in that regard.
boomer. Right. He's a boomer. Right.
A boomer, that's it. He's a
Like,
boomer.
okay, boomer. You want to say, okay, boomer. But yeah. Um, oh, and Ramisha mentioned, our fan Ramisha here mentioned Greenland. So she says Trump's stance on Greenland may create a rift between the EU and the US. Also, note during the Russian ops in Ukraine, Germany and France continue their deals on one hand, sanctioning Russia on the other. It's always about interests. Well, yes. So I think this kind of, I mean, everybody brings up, and I think I'll bring that up in the next show. It might be a good topic for Tuesday's show. I'm actually probably going to write something about that this weekend. But everybody mentions like the Monroe Doctrine is like this big thing right now that everybody's talking about. But one thing they don't mention is that Monroe Doctrine, when President Monroe, as the name suggests, in the early 19th century, suggested it. No one paid attention to him except Russia. Russia is the only country that actually agreed to the Monroe Doctrine. The other European countries all ignored it. Said, "Yeah, whatever, dude. We're going to continue colonizing, the new worlds. Nothing you can do about it. You can't stop us." But the other detail that's important is that it was a two-way street. So the USA was saying, well, we agree to not meddle in European affairs, which I think in the early 1800s was kind of a funny thing to say because the US did not even have the means to meddle in Europe. What was the US? What was the 1820s USA going to do to Europe? Nothing. But as time went on, that became more important. And Wilson threw that idea under the bus in World War I by attacking Germany because Germany had not attacked the USA. There wasn't under, the USA's own neutrality policy. There wasn't any grounds for the USA to pick a side in the war against Germany. And then FDR reframed the Monroe Doctrine to be basically, I mean, he kind of neoliberalized it a little bit, but he kind of tried to walk back the Monroe Doctrine a bit. So it's not just attacking who we feel like it. But then Truman really put the final nail in the coffin because he permanently occupied Europe, became world policeman. There was no point even talking about Monroe Doctrine anymore. So when everybody talks about Monroe Doctrine now, they just mean, oh, well, that just means no one else except the USA is allowed to do regime changes or meddle in the New World, in our hemisphere. Well, yes, but also no, because if the USA wanted to claim that, well, they can't really say that when they still have bases in Eurasia and actually basically everywhere. There's no basis for the USA to say that. But now, all that said, I do think this kind of hyper one-sided Monroe Doctrine that Trump is doing.
The Donroe Doctrine.
Yeah, Donroe Doctrine is a good word for it. I think, I think it's popular. His supporters all like it, even if they're a minority, even if, let's say 30% of the population is for it. Well, that's the 30% that's going to vote for him. So, those other 60 or 70% are all against it. Well, they weren't going to vote. Those are all people who are either going to vote against him or not vote at all. It's the 30% who are going to vote for him who matter. And that's who wins elections. So I think it is popular. We're going to find out this year, I guess, how popular it is. But I think it's popular. Now, if he's putting pressure on Venezuela, and he's putting pressure on everybody. He's talking about troops in Mexico. He's talking about he's like coming up with this casus belli for Greenland. Like, Greenland is not doing their part to monitor for Russian submarine. Like, he's coming up with this whole elaborate justification for why Greenland not belonging to the USA is an act of aggression, right? Well, this Greenland doesn't belong to us, and that's aggressive towards us. So we should just take it. It's great logic. I love that logic that this country doesn't belong or this region doesn't belong to me. So that's an act that violates my rights. So I should just take it. It's great reasoning. That said, I don't think it's going to do anything to your. I disagree with Ramesh on that one. I don't think it's going to do anything. I think they're just so subservient. What are they going to do? What are they going to do? Throw out the Americans at their base? I don't think they will. I think even if he just landed troops and took Greenland, did a special military operation to take Greenland, I don't think anyone would do anything. I don't think even Denmark would do anything. They would just make a bunch of angry tweets about how, and like show some memes of Trump with a Hitler mustache and say, this is literally like I don't know, World War II or whatever. But they're not going to do anything. I don't think they're going to do anything. They're just going to roll over.
It's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. And I love watching, the oligarchs and, their different puppet governments, have this internal feuding and fighting. And then, the question is, at what point is the fighting just for show purposes? And, how much are they agreeing underneath, the surface? But, can't really say that in front of the cameras. But I do think that, that would piss a lot of people off, and it would definitely undermine, this transatlantic alliance that Trump, doesn't have a lot of use for to begin with. And that's a good thing. I've always been happy that Trump is willing to undermine this transatlantic alliance.
I agree with you to an extent that I love seeing the snakes turn on each other, but at the same time, I don't think it's going to, I think they're just so cucked, as Defiance said, EU cuckistan. I just don't think it's even going to undermine the alliance. They're just so subordinated. What are they going to do?
They're agitating their people against Trump and against the United States. The European leaders are agitating their people, and they're getting praised by their people for being defiant against Trump, because Trump is not liked in Europe, and they see him as, being a traitor, really, and being illiberal. And so, I think it's good that there's just, how the ruling class, the ownership class, likes to divide the working class along all these different axes. They have the same problem, within their own class. And it's good that when they're divided up and they can't unify against us. But
like Ramesh is saying, the administration has announced shoot anyone.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's what I'm saying.
They're not, though. I mean, like the latest news. So the rumor is that Trump is trying to make a deal with the people in Greenland itself, and like the deal is like giving $1 million to every household, which is, so it looks like the approach is he's just going to buy it. And the thing is, it almost doesn't matter how much he gives them. I mean, he could give them each $2 million or $3 million. You're all going to be millionaires. You can just be a millionaire right now. You don't even have to live. You can stay there, or you can move somewhere else. I don't care. Who cares? But Greenland, I'm sure just the resources, whatever is there alone, is worth more than whatever he's. I mean, it's like purchasing Alaska from Russia. At the time, it was I forget the name, the Secretary of State who negotiated. I forget his name, but they literally called it his follies. Like it's the it's just such a stupid thing to do.
Right,
spend so much money, because it was very expensive. Whatever he agreed to pay Russia was so expensive, and they were like, "Oh, this is outrageous." But Alaska was a huge benefit to the USA, and I think it's the same with Greenland.
In retrospect, it was a great bargain. Obviously,
$50 billion for Greenland is great. And what are the Denmark guys going to do about it? Nothing.
It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I know, Europe is giving a lot of lip service against it. And so they might be, again, I think they're overstating how much they oppose it. I don't think they could care less about Greenland. I doubt even the Kingdom of Denmark really cares about Greenland. But I think they're interested in putting forth this optic that there's a divorce between Europe and the United States, because there's an agreement that Europe needs to start spending more on defense, right? And the people don't want to spend more on defense. But if you can show the people that it's necessary because we're under threat and the U.S. is no longer helping us. In fact, the U.S. is an antagonist. We've got to start taking care of ourselves. you shove that idea down everybody's throat, and then they're going to agree to, turn their welfare states into, militarized states. And that's what they need to do. That's what they want to do. That's what the elites want them to do. And so the question is, how do you drag the people along? And one of the ways is, these big theater things like, United States, we can't trust them anymore. They're not going to protect us. We have to protect ourselves. Look, they're stealing Greenland from us. Anyway, so this is what, how much of it is theater, how much of it is reality is the question. You mentioned Tuesday's show, and I do want to remind everyone that we will be having representatives from the American Communist Party on Tuesday's episode. And we're going to talk about what the platform is of the American Communist Party, what they're doing in the United States, and I think, I wish it was Haas. Maybe at some point, when we have more than 10 viewers, we'll be able to attract Haas's attention. But
we've got at least 20 viewers now. We're kind of a big deal.
So if anybody knows Haas or Jackson, hey, have them come on. So it's an open question. I know. We have Jay. Jay is from Tennessee. He might be the chapter. I forget what their titles are exactly. He's like the chapter head in Tennessee. So he's coming on, and then he's going to have also someone else, and we will see, who we can get. It would be great if it's Jackson, Haas, and the rest of the guys, Eddie, and but I'd be happy to formally ask Haas if I thought that was going to be productive. I definitely can. Anyway, so that's Tuesday's show. It's going to be ACP centric. And before we adjourn, is there anything else, Ian, that we want to?
No, check out the link in the description. And I think that's all we got, except tune in for Tuesday.
Check Ian's.
Also, guys, if you follow that link, there will be an email sign up. That's going to be where I'm going to announce future podcasts. So if you sign up for an email, you will probably get a notification around Sunday or Monday telling you about the exact time we're going to do that ACP interview.
We know it should be the same time, 9 a.m. West Coast, noon Eastern time. I don't expect that to change, but you might know exactly who the guest will be through that email. Also, Ian's blog has a link to do all your Amazon purchasing, and that'll help Ian support himself in communist Russia. It is not easy.
Yes.
So support Ian's extravagant lifestyle by using that link to do all your Amazon purchasing. That way, Bezos does not get 100%. But yeah, so we will see everyone on Tuesday. Have a great weekend.